Hello students, this is Professor McDermott with the video recap of your Module 4 discussions. In this recap, I'm not going to cover the Theodore Roosevelt video discussions because everyone had the same material and I think you all got what you needed from that. So we'll just focus on the Gilded Age Reform documents. Group 1, you had part of Jane Addams's autobiography, 20 Years at Hull House, talking about how she and her companions had founded the first settlement community there in Chicago. And I asked the group what were the main successes and failures that Jane Addams experienced in her programs at Hull House. And here is the group, or here is actually James Herring's answer. James was the chair for this module, and thanks, James, you did a terrific job. The two main successes of the Hull House were the spaces it used for social gatherings. The gymnasium provided an opportunity for the young people's clubs to have a larger area for dancing and parties. The coffee house was used as a convenience for teachers and businessmen for a place to eat near to their workplaces. The coffee house was also used by house students and small groups to interact and hold reunions and social banquets. The biggest thing learned was that the wants of the neighborhood did more in shaping the use of the Hull House than did their ideas of what the neighborhood needed. And that last sentence is key there. As James said, Hull House really provided a space where people in the community could go to have social events, and as such, it was very valuable. But the people in the community also did give some pushback to Jane Addams for some of the things that she tried to implement, specifically the menu. And Jamisha Hawley got into that issue when she said, quote, "The public kitchen and coffee house was at first not as successful because of the wide diversity and inherited tastes. It was also patronized by a few households, which was best summed up by a woman who confessed that the food was nutritious, but that she did not like to eat what was nutritious." In fact, she says, "I'd rather eat what I'd rather." And that, these were immigrants who were used to eating their own national cuisine, like pasta for the Italians, and corned beef and cabbage for the Irish, and so forth. And Jane Addams's attempts to feed them what a middle-class family of the time in America would have considered healthy food were often not appreciated, and so she had to modify the menu somewhat. Also, Jerquisha Gilbert pointed out that some people didn't like the non-alcoholic nature of the soft drinks that were being served in the coffee house, and in fact, there was one old guy who said, "This would be a very nice place to spend the day if you only had beer." But Jane Addams was, of course, a teetotaler, being a reformer, a white middle-class reformer in the Gilded Age, and so that was not allowed in Hull House. As far as the failures were concerned, here's your group answer. I think we agree that the Coal Association was ultimately a failure. This was a cooperative for collective buying of coal, due to the members' philanthropic attitude of giving coal instead of stock and one basket free out of every 6, which they did out of their knowledge of raising kids in poverty. The Fallen Girls program was also a failure in that the girls could not return to their social standing due to the stigma of their circumstances, even though they were provided with a safe haven to consider their options. The parents of the good girls did not want the fallen girls associating with their girls in the clubs at the Hull House. One of the bad girls even got kicked out of the Sunday school at a church in another part of the city. And we're talking about fallen girls, we're talking about young girls who were got involved in prostitution, and even cases where their dads were pimping them out. And it was just absolutely heartrending, some of the stories that she alluded to. But the problem was, Jane Addams, being an American reformer and humanitarian, thought, well, of course these girls should be given a second chance. But she ran up against, once again, the European immigrant cultures she was dealing with, because in those cultures, those girls were dead. I mean, they were shunned once they had gotten into that lifestyle, even for a very short time, even if it wasn't really their fault. And so this was something that Jane Addams met a lot of resistance on as well, very sadly. Well, for the final question, I asked Group 1 if they thought that she was really a great humanitarian or just kind of a rich busybody who was trying to change the cultures and the lifestyles of these immigrant people. And pretty much everybody agreed that she was a great humanitarian. And for the record, I agree as well. I think clearly, probably the most admirable American of the Gilded Age, Jane Addams. All right, moving on. Group 1, just want to say before we go, another great discussion. I don't want to take that for granted. Really continue to be so proud of you guys. You're setting a standard for the new ASU and for this course, and I appreciate it. All right, but Group 2, my tone is very different with you this week because I'm also very pleased with the progress you made in this module. Big improvement as you dealt with a chapter from Jacob Riis's landmark book of 1890, How the Other Half Lives. You had the Harvest of Tares chapter in which he talks a great deal about the lifestyle in the New York City slums. And I asked Group 2 what were some of the factors, two of the factors that Riis points to as making the life of the slum dwellers worse. And here's the group answer posted by Sean K. Cleckley. Sean K., terrific job as chair. We feel that the two factors that made the lives of the people worse are the gangs and the low wages. The gangs murdered and robbed people in the neighborhoods, making the people feel unsafe. The fact that the amount of gang members outnumbered the policemen also made the people feel unsafe. However, so many immigrants turned to gangs because they had poor communication skills and the jobs were paying very low wages with unnecessary fines and taxes. The women would turn to prostitution because of this as well. And on the gang members, you had some very nice discussion here. Carson Najee, you went into more detail on this. There would be murders of just innocent people in the slums. It wasn't uncommon for there to be a storekeeper or a barber to be murdered in cold blood. Robbery was tied in with the murders. The slums were so poor, people had to rob stores and hire class people just to survive. And Deja, you went into more detail here. You said they did things to get pinched, aka arrested, to be seen as heroes to their fellows. They committed murders using cowards' weapons such as brass knuckles, deadly sandbags, and brickbats. Does this sound familiar? Yes. There really is nothing new under the sun, and if you read accounts of gang activity in modern cities, not that dissimilar from what was going on in Riis's New York. And Michael Jones, I really liked your post on this issue where you offered some insight as to why people would have gotten involved with this gang lifestyle in the first place. You said, quote, depending on how you look at gangs and prostitution, both could be a curse and a blessing. Gangs are very organized. Yes, they commit all sorts of crime, but sometimes they rise to a level of street authority. Prostitution is the same way. It could very well be run by a gang or they are run by a madam. So in a neighborhood of new immigrants, a family that is poor and is in need would go to the leaders of the gangs or the madam for help. They would provide assistance to their neighbors in exchange for something, and all is well. Sort of like the saying, scratch my back and I will scratch yours. And yeah, I think that's the secret, especially for the gangs. There's a desire for belonging. You're in this strange country. You may not even speak the language. And you're alone and you're living hand to mouth and you want support. And the gang seems to provide that, as well as a sense of belonging and, in a perverse way, even a kind of bravery in a sense, although certainly in a very antisocial, destructive way. Well, I asked Group 2 if they thought Riis was a true humanitarian in a sense that really cared about poor people, or if he was looking down on poor people. And I think that, Tiara, you got to the bottom of this. You said, I feel as though he was trying to change the slum environment. This is Tiara Newell. He felt as if they did not have a choice when it came to joining a gang or committing crimes. He felt like this was what they were accustomed to doing and seeing in their neighborhood. And Ann Makundi elaborated on this. She said, Riis felt that the people living in the slums were living a life of poverty and ignorance. I feel like he generally cares about poor people. He sees the way some of them live and how they fear the gang activities in their community. Riis feels that if he betters the way they live, crime will go down. And I think that's the key. Riis did have some contempt for poor people, but at the same time, he realized and understood that, or he believed firmly, that it was the environment of the slums that was producing their antisocial behavior. And he had hope that if that environment could be changed, that the people could be bettered. He didn't think it was something genetic. In other words, with the poor people, he blamed the environment. All right. Much better, Group 2. Really pleased at the way you responded to my comments last time. Thank you. Group 3, you're kind of in the position where Group 2 was in the last module. And there isn't much to recap, although James Rafe Waters, you did a valiant job of trying to stir up discussion, and there were some other people that were active as well. But we need a lot more participation, Group 3. And a lot more could have been done with this reading from Jacob Rees on the problem of the children. So I asked what were the problems that Rees was bringing out in this excerpt, and Rafe, you posted as chair here's your answer, actually. 1, excessive overcrowding due to the large uncontrolled reproduction of children. 2, the lack of vocational educational opportunities afforded to these equally capable youth. So you've got large numbers of children. Their families can't take care of them, and many of them end up on the streets, and of course, inevitably, they get involved in gangs. And for question 2, I asked you to go into more detail on some of these issues. Roderick Smith, you pointed out that the crimes that are being done in the slums include killing your own children for an insurance payout. Shocking. And Brianna Williams, a related issue, parents would often essentially sell their kids to baby farms. So Roderick and Brianna, you had some very good contributions here. What was a baby farm? If you couldn't afford to take care of your child, sometimes parents would pay a small amount of money to a quote-unquote baby farmer. It was like a permanent daycare or an unregulated orphanage, and you would just leave your kid with this person, and often the kids would wind up starved because the money wouldn't go very far, and it was cheaper for the baby farmer to just let the kids die. Absolutely tragic end to these young lives. And as far as whether you thought Rees looked down on the people or really cared about the people, you all agreed a little of both. Hopefully next time, Group 3, we'll have a little more to talk about with your discussions. I did see at the third Theodore Roosevelt questions the beginnings of a glimmering of an exchange of ideas, and I appreciate that. So let's keep that going. And all right, looking forward to the next batch of discussions. Thanks, everyone.